Good afternoon, everybody, or good evening, I should say, from sunny England. And welcome to a slightly late, but nevertheless, we're here. Apologies for that. There's been a couple of technical difficulties that Ellie has managed to sort out. I certainly would have been snookered. But welcome to an episode on Where It's At called Flying Monkeys, or the Fall of the Flying Monkey. We'll go into a little bit more to why we came up with that title as we go along in the podcast. Good of you all to join us. I, as always, can't see the chat, but we'll come around to that in a bit as well. But thank you, those of you who have popped in, taken the time, waited for us as well. Much appreciated. And of course, those who are going to be listening in at a later date, thank you as well for popping in and thus supporting our channel. I'd like to state right from the beginning as well that during the course of the podcast, the email address will be put up on the screen. So we'd love to encourage anybody who wants to really get involved in any way, shape or form to please do get in touch with us. And we will most definitely respond. It's much easier than trying to throw links up to on comments underneath people's videos, because I mean, how many people look back on the comments of their videos from 2 weeks ago or whatever, right? So yeah, anybody who wants to get involved, please do. We are going to have one or two more people getting involved very soon. And hopefully we'll be also getting somebody on next week or so to come on and chat about a few things that they've done in the past. But that will be at a later date. I'll go into that more later as well. First of all, I'd like to say a big hello to Ellie. How you doing? Can she hear me? He's on mute. Okay, well, while we're sorting that out, basically we had a slight sort of interlude the last week or two because there was quite a few things going on, so we didn't really get round to actually doing much on the Where It's At channel, but I did manage to, in that time, thanks to the help of our guest today, as was last time as well, to put some footage out through the SvenP Channel. And I hope a few of you managed to get to see some of that footage. Both live streams are out on that channel, on the SvenP Channel. Hopefully we can eventually put them out on the Where It's At channel as well. But I just did that in the meantime because I thought, well, if we can't, for whatever reason, get together to do the other stuff, at least I can still get something out while we had the opportunity. The weather was nice, and of course all the rest of it all worked nicely timing wise, so that's why we decided to go ahead with that anyway. But it should all be business as usual from now on in, really. So we will be having, as we were planning anyway, podcasts regularly on Sundays, and of course during the week we'll be putting videos out. We will be this week as well, just not too sure which one yet, but we do have quite a bit of footage, and something most certainly will be going out. Well, we seem to have some technical difficulties. We've lost Ellie, not literally, but you know what I mean. So while we're waiting for her to figure that out in the background, I may as well just call in Dave, Trinity4, and start a conversation. How you doing, Dave?
I'm doing great. Sven, how are you?
Yeah, not bad, thank you.
Good.
Thanks for joining us. Although we do have one or two technical difficulties, but this conversation is kind of following on from the podcast that you came on 2 weeks ago, and when we were talking about flying pigs, basically having to believe in that if you're going to believe the official narrative of a lot of the buildings that surround us. And so we decided to follow up on that with a couple of live streams last week, one on Monday and one after that on Wednesday. The one on Monday was about 2 hours, 2.5 hours long. The one on Wednesday a bit longer, over 3 hours, 3.5 hours actually. But the one on Monday started, off the top of my head now, at the town hall where we met. Do you want to tell us a little bit something about that? What your first impression? I mean, you know the buildings anyway, but you know how you saw it on that day when we were sort of walking around there and had a look at it.
Yeah, Town Hall was one of those buildings I'd looked at previously a year ago when I'd stayed for a little while before going to South Africa. I'd stayed in Bournemouth, so I'd gone around and looked at the buildings here, and that one caught my attention. It was it's a grand sized building for a small town, from the late 1800s that doesn't really fit for the needs of that place. The sizes are pretty grand. The vaulted sort of entranceway hides a lower floor that is also, as we see, partly dug out in some window areas, and just a lot of things. I think one of the interesting things about that, because we're talking about how these buildings might have been clad. This one offers clues on that, particularly with the front door being such a, the whole works of the door. It's just a very thin one brick of depth, which doesn't at all match with the thickness of the building walls. And you'd expect that doorway to match that. So.
Dave, just to be clear on this, right? Just to be clear on it. So we're not just talking about the actual original building necessarily. We're talking about the facading and the cladding over the top of those buildings, right?
Yeah, I think this is one, something that's really came to me after the time I had in Letton Hall in the first lockdown, where it was obvious that there was a red brick bricked in the basement areas, bricked in windows. And that was underneath the skin of the building, and the skin of the building, it seemed to me to be slipping off the building. And I noticed that you could see through to the red brick, and it became possible for me that what was happening was there was a recladding of an old building in order to hide its true story. And I mean, we're talking about, when you start thinking about that, we are talking about a massive amount of works, a massive amount of cladding. A massive amount of hiding of stuff, and so it opens some very interesting questions about how that massive scale of work may have been conducted. Because as we saw walking around Bournemouth, there's so many buildings that are credited to that period, 1880, 1890, around about then, that this little town must have been a hive of activity. Where for a very small few thousand population type of conurbation. So
it's like what you said, they wouldn't have been able to move for building sites, would they?
No. And also, the supply of all of this, the movement and supply of all of this vast number of bricks, and the craftsmen needed for the wooden window frames, and all the work that happens around that. So just the glazier work, and these are grand structures. But yeah, that was a good place to start. The town hall. It wasn't the original town hall. We did come across a place that was used as a town hall apparently before that. But the scope of the works are huge, and the requisite dig that's needed to lower a building, or to drop a building below street level, and all of the retaining walls that we've come across in Bournemouth that would require a builder to start with a retaining wall of some sort, and then either remove that retaining wall and move it closer, because sometimes you find the building and the retaining wall are right up against each other, and so it suggests that a builder, if you believe that the narrative, a builder decided to dig it all out, retain it, and then fill it again with soil up against the wall, which would put his own brickwork under quite a lot of pressure. He'd have to make allowances for that, and you'd see some sort of evidence of that. But,
it would also suggest that they would have had their hands on plans, wouldn't they, of the original structures, to be able to know exactly what measurements were required and dimensions and stuff, to be able to clad that so accurately, right?
I'm not sure about that. When you said that, it made me think of Letton Hall, and how I think they might. I don't know. I guess that could go either way. That one, I think it's possible. You see, because what we typically think when we cast our minds back to the 1800s and so on is people who were just milling about on horse and cart, but clearly to have conducted this scale of refabrication or façadery is required technology and ability and infrastructure beyond what we could possibly have imagined for those times and those people. So is it possible that they had a technology that could map a building and then recreate what they needed? Because I really, when I look at the scale of these buildings and the amount of work that was involved in recladding them, if that's what we're seeing and that's what has happened, then it's a massive undertaking and could not be done other than by non-human means. It could not be done but for a scale of operation that is, it's hard to fathom. So yeah, the ability for them to have technology that they use to pull this off is certain. I mean, we both probably agree, I think, on them pouring concrete. That a lot of these pillars and brickworks and so on are simply poured concrete slabs and shapes and sconces and whatnot.
Absolutely. And you were also mentioning those what was it, those pillars that look like marble, right? That you have on all these buildings in different diameters, different thicknesses, the cylindrical shaped ones. And I saw them a lot in monasteries and stuff like that. They seem to use that all over the place.
Yeah, so the use of sound technology to create a slurry and then to harden it in a mold. Yeah, no problem. I think if they are able to elevate things perhaps with sound technology, then the construction becomes a whole lot easier. So yeah, that was a good place to start. That town hall, we had a little wander around. We noticed that one section of the building appeared to have been connected to the main building at a later stage, that it might well have been an original building, but the floor levels between these two buildings were off. And I've seen this in other government, old buildings that I've been into when I worked in government. I just put it down to, well, like most people, it's just put a building, or the coming together of two buildings built by different people at different times, and so they.
Yeah,
they're all over the place.
And then, of course, the plot thickens, Dave, when you notice that when you go below basement level, not only have they gone below basement level, but the fact of the matter is that it's brickwork, which kind of course, also doesn't make sense in that moment, does it? Because you'd like we said before in the previous podcast, you'd have to put something impervious. If you're going to be building basement rooms, then you would use a different material than bricks with mortar. And you certainly wouldn't put windows in the side of the wall.
No, they would leak. They would leak moisture and wick water.
And the view isn't great either.
The buildings wouldn't last for hundreds of years don't think, and these are, as we've said many times, these are grand buildings. These are not built by donkeys and horses and chariots and so on. This is quality construction. I mean, we have to. I think we have to break. I mean, for me anyway, I feel like I need to break it into two parts, and that is that there was an original building that was lost and then reclaimed at a later stage, let's say somewhere between 1800 and 1850, 1860 perhaps, maybe. But and then another round of reclamation continues under the guise of the Victorian kind of thing.
Very good point, actually, because when you think about it, Queen Victoria, as she was called, we know that Victoria is the Greek goddess of victory called Nike, which is also very interesting to get your sneakers on. But, Victoria reigned from 1837. So from her, when she came into play, let's say, when I suggest our narrative really starts around about that time, beginning of the 1800s, this all kicks in. This all kicks in, and those dates that you're mentioning there, 1850 and all that sort of stuff, is right in the middle, because her period is until 1901. So it pretty much takes care of the whole 19th century.
Yeah, I get a feeling that anything, the whole World War One thing was like a, an event designed to break people and take them out of, get them to forget what life
Mm,
was like before, because we saw it in 2020. And
yeah.
even though what happened in 2020 doesn't match what happened in what was it,
14.
19 or 14, yeah.
Hmm.
It doesn't match that. But perhaps, but of course, because, all these young families were broken up, hardship, people sent off and never came back, and all that sort of thing. So, the trauma that those generations, and my father was of the Second World War, just born just before it, the trauma of that generation was used as a step down from what society was used to normally. So, now we can look around our towns and see people, flinching from each other and covering themselves up and so on. And that's just after 2 years of nappy brigade. So, I've got, and people, young people particularly, will have little reference to what our normal was like in terms of how we physically might have interacted. A good example is with the smoking thing. Like my my university son, he and his friends went to the club the other night, and they left the dance floor for a smoke break a few times. And
Mm.
it's like, what, you go for a smoke break? Like, that sounds like you're at work like we were. But for
Right.
them, the idea of smoking at the bar while you're having a drink is something that's disgusting. They would be like, no, why would I do that? I would go outside and have a smoke break. Yeah, if that's what I want to do. So, for them, normal is that now. Whereas for us, being in a saloon with a smoke in your hand was normal, and that has gone away. And so I think that that the history and the story and perhaps the cover up of the old construction,
Mm.
could have been hidden or buried in that. I have some other theories, but that's one of them.
But it was clearly an agenda, because you see the Victorian influence in all of these old buildings, where you can see it's been added, of course, right?
Mm.
So clearly there was a lot of work for them to do in that period, that just so happens to coincide with the technological capabilities required to be able to cut things like brick and rock and attach steel girders to them and stuff. Just the same cutting stuff, the cutting equipment required to build these bloody things in the first place. Yet we never had them until 18 something, allegedly, right? So yeah, that's
Mhm.
for me, that's the key moment, is the Victorian era and all that, because that's when it all starts
So
happening in terms of the
yeah,
technological,
yeah, we are given a history about the, what are they called? Not the Luddites, the troglodyte, not, you know what I mean? Were they the Luddites, the people who smashed up the Industrial Revolution stuff, and the
Yeah,
story
I
we're
know what you
given
mean. Mm,
might be a complete false flag,
sure.
sort of a story to explain away what went on by design, which was to remove technology from our cities that did things other than, we're told, oh, they had these uh,
Mm,
cotton mills and things like that were smashed up. That was what they were smashing up. But I think it may well be, it's all this black metal, and
mm.
it may well be this was part of a technology that was in use and perhaps used. But I can never, now I've seen so much of it. This idea that, because I didn't really think about it as much. But having walked around Bournemouth, I'm like, I'm sure that this is what's going on. It's a clad that's put on to an existing structure. But if that's true, then that's happened over vast millions of pieces of property. And there has to be some other worldly explanation as to how that could be achieved right underneath our noses, or perhaps in our absence. Even if it's in our absence, then who's here doing that work for the decades it would take, the eon, it would seem to kind of go around all these places, London and
Mm.
Leicester and Liverpool and all these places, and take these beautiful buildings and
Yeah.
cover them with something else. You know, and it's a project of such vastness that I can't explain it. It's almost like, oh, am I sure I'm seeing what I think I'm seeing? You know, just given the scale of it. But having said that, all that, you know, just simply taking these buildings from the ground up and building them at any time, you know, in a 20, 30, 40-year window, would be a feat, but you know, of magnificent proportion, and one that I do not think we could emulate today. But for the advantage of having a massive workforce, technology, you know, and that kind of thing, which apparently they didn't have, neither the technology nor the population.
Well, the thing is, right, I came across something a couple of days ago, and it's about there's a football stadium being constructed in the city of Liverpool at the moment, right? It doesn't matter for what club or anything like that, but I was just looking at the construction photos, the drone footage that they were showing, and you know, the equipment they've got there just to raise some pillars of pre-poured concrete and put them into, slot them into place. That takes a lot of manpower and equipment. Just that. We're not even talking about the you know, we're not even talking about the process of quarrying, getting it out the ground, cutting it to size, the stone masonry involved, the tools you'd need, and then who builds your tools? Where's your transport systems? Where's your roadways? Blah, blah. We know all the arguments, right? But I was just looking at that, and it just reminded me, that's how we build things nowadays. You know, motorway bridges, they're concrete monstrosities. They're pieced together. They drive on their low loaders on the motorway at 3 in the morning when the traffic is empty, when there's no traffic on the roads. And that's how we build things nowadays. We don't go anywhere close to that sort of intricacies that you witness, even on the facading, never mind the original constructions that they're hiding or trying to hide.
Yep. It's a real mystery, and you know, for me, it begs the question, you know, what is it that they're hiding, and why go to such great lengths to facade these buildings, to hide the story, you know, because of, you know, me pushing taking the facade element out of it, you are still left with at the baseline, you're still left with a building sunk in the ground. And you and I have just, you know, in these 2 walkabouts have seen so much evidence of it. You know, it's overwhelming, and it's pretty much everywhere wherever you turn. So
I mean, we saw bits and bobs there, Dave, where we were talking 5-10 meters easily. It could have gone down, and much further than that.
Yeah, no, the scope of the amount under the mud is, you know, and actually what happens is they'll dig down as far as they can. They might only get, you know, they'll find like let's say a half a floor, or a 2/3 of a floor that's still exposed, 1/3 of it lost under the sand, and that's as deep as they'll go. They will probably cap that off, put a floor on it, and say, well, we'll just have a short floor here and a taller floor. I pointed that out on that other building we looked at. Oh no, one of the buildings we looked at, it was like, yeah, this first section of the building is a whole lot shorter, i.e. the ground floor is a whole lot shorter than the first floor above it. That again doesn't make sense. You would normally, if you're going to make any floor higher than any other floor, it would normally be your ground floor. Your grandest rooms are normally on the ground floor. So you know, that's what I think happens, is that they'll just cap it off wherever they can get to, and then everything below that, it could be stories. You know, we certainly saw 3 stories that were you know, partially, but were submerged, I think, at one site. So yeah, it's altogether possible that there's many stories still below the ground. We know that, I think that, well, we know of towns that are under the soil. As I said, at Letton Hall, they don't the farmer next door is paid not to dig over his field at the back of Letton Hall, because you know, there's rooftops there, and there's a village underneath it. It's all, you know, to say it's an old Roman village, and it, you know, it just got, you know, covered with dirt over time. I suppose dust blew down, and they just didn't bother sweeping the streets for a few weeks, and then the whole thing was covered. It's funny how that happens. In paleontology, you know, about 2 inches is about 5 million years. And then in this subject, it's like, no, 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 that probably just happened over a short period of time. Like in Canterbury, you know, you can go down into the building in the basement. They say, this is where you were in the 1500s. Come upstairs 5-6 steps. Now you're into the 1700s. And then now, you know, another 3-4 steps and you're up onto the current street level. And, you know, it's cultural layers, you know, just dust and people threw their cans and you know, packets out into the street because they'd invented those. And,
well, I mean,
and then they just gave up on the street.
Yeah,
upstairs.
we saw that, didn't we? We saw a lot of examples of neglect and filth as well in these places, right? So where it just, you know, there was the one where we were stood next to the building with the roof burnt off, next to the old fire station, for example. I know that was on the second live stream. It's just something that sprang to mind right now. And you saw around the side, it just looked ghetto-like. It was just horrible. And it's just things like that where you think, why is nobody doing something here? I guess they are, but I don't know. I'm not seeing that. I don't know.
Well, I think that what this style of building, some people contend still that this was done on purpose. But what this style of building leaves you with is huge amounts of problems with dirt and everything else. You know, rain loves a hole, and not according to the Globers, but for rain loves a hole, and it'll rush in there into the pit. It'll take dirt with it. Leaves, of course, are blowing in there now. Your plastic bags and other sorts of, you know, detritus going in down there, and you see the window frames and the door frames are struggling with moisture control. There's almost always moss growing down in these sections. I remember at Letton Hall, they'd spent a lot of money on drainage, trying to take water away from the building, because of it being partially submerged, you know. And when it rains hard, that water gets waterlogged, and it wants to find a way in, or away from where it's at. So, yeah, there are so many problems with that, and oftentimes, it's once you're dug down into a hole down there, you have to make do with what you've got, and it's a bit of it's really, from an engineering or management point of view, it's just created a whole lot of difficulties. And then, you see that all over the place. And I am not willing to accept the theory that these people didn't have the foresight or the experience to say, we're creating ourselves a whole lot of extra work, and then down the line, so much headache with ingress of everything that loves moving into a hole.
Yeah, either a hole or a flat roof, I always found a bit bizarre as well. You know, constructing buildings in a country that has a particular climate, you wouldn't necessarily build flat roofing either, would you? Unless things have been removed from that roof, and that's what it reveals. For example, when we're talking about rain and water and erosion and problems and all that.
Yeah, I think more than the reason why they do that, because we've obviously looked at a few of those flat roofs. These for me are normally like an add-on to increase the size of the building, because they've obviously lost a big section below. It may be to hide certain entranceways or things like that. But the reason I suggest that they always go for a flat roof is because the moment you put a pitch roof on, for example, on the side of a church, you'll take that pitch roof right up into the windows, stained glass windows above. Whereas a flat roof will keep you on the same floor level without your ground floor now ingressing into the floor above by having a unsightly roof. You and I think saw one like that the other day, where there was a section of roof that was covering, it may have been a flat section, but it was a section of the building that was covering a beautiful window. That you'd be like, no, they would not have designed that window behind that ugly, monstrosity of a box that they put in front of that. But they can't take the pitch up, because it will be right into the window space. That's where they'll be fixing it to the wall. And no builder would have, that would be very hard to explain. Oh, so they got these lovely stained glass windows here, but 2/3 or 1/3 of them is covered by your pitch window now, your pitch roof. Now, what engineer, whatever, came up with that genius idea? Well, that's why I think they often keep them flat, so that they don't go above the floor that they're trying to extend. But
Interesting.
they all, yeah, they always create problems, and you know, those pitch roofs need to be retarred every few years, as I think I mentioned the other day, and you know, water from them, drainage from them, tends to be problematic, and you find, as I did with Letton Hall, actually, that you know, they've got mold and damp in the ceilings from their flat roof sections.
Yeah.
So and sometimes those flat sections are balconies that have been added to a sort of a new, what becomes the new master bedroom area, where once would have been a much smaller or less important section of the house, now needs to have this balcony added to it to give it some more space, grandeur, maybe to, you know, hide some of the facadery that's clearly gone on. It became so obvious to us as we were walking around the other day, right? All
It
this,
did. It did. And look, when you look at the screen now, for example, when you see, when they talk about facadery, we have facadery upon facadery there, don't we? Remember when we looked at those buildings right there, and we noticed that if you ignore the paintwork, that's all one big construction. From the right, where the camera is there, right next to that flat roof building, and then over to the left, where the camera might swing in a minute, if I'm just preempting my own camera work there. And there was about, I can't remember how many there were, 10 of those gables or 12, something like that. But it was definitely all one construction. Or at least it appears to be on the front. Again, facading, right?
Yeah, well, the brickwork, I remember that one. The brickwork did run right across.
That's right.
It was a consistent brickwork style and so on. So yeah, that one made sense as a single facade. Although obviously some of those window boxes weren't the same anymore. Although that could be put down to, you could say, age and so on. You know, that they've been changed by new owners at different times with different styles. But it seemed like one facade. And yeah, again, you know, for a small place, it's an impressive piece of work, and a big decision to dig all of that into the ground. You know, so, and of course, if it, you know, it's the building next to it that's not of the same build, well, you're having to build. If one building comes before the other, you're having to build down your 20-30 foot foundings right next to and under almost the building, the adjacent which you're going to stick your bricks. So, you know, it's just so many like anomalies with the idea that they would have dug these straight into the ground, you know, rather than they got sunk.
Yeah. And then we have to go back to the old chestnut of the dates don't jive in terms of the actual, you know, the amount of bricks required to build these constructions in the time that we're told that they were built, right? So again, it's all late 1900s or 1800s, sorry. And often you see 1903, 1910 is quite a popular date. But again, all these things were done simultaneously. How the hell would you do that? You know, in a place, like you say, was not very densely populated. And certainly the whole network, the whole transport system and all that sort of stuff was just nowhere near what it is now. Nowhere near. But yeah, and we moved on from those buildings there that we were looking at. We ended up going down the road, and hopefully the camera will eventually go in that direction. But we ended up going down the road to Bournemouth College with the clock tower. I know this is all live stream too, but as that's the picture we have in front of us, I thought maybe that would be the best thing to just mention. So yeah, okay, we were having a look at the buildings on the other side of the road and everything else, but then we went down to the college that I thought originally may have all been original, but then on closer examination, of course, was not the case, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's great that you can see that and say that, because you know, from first glances you would say, oh yeah, that was how it was originally built and so on, but
right.
This was a great example. I think there was some great evidences with this one that where we're looking at facade, and we haven't got there yet on your feed.
We haven't got there yet on the screen, no. But maybe we could move that on a little bit, perhaps. But yeah, it was yeah, definitely, because they've gone through, like you were saying earlier, and like you said that day, they've obviously gone through a lot of effort to make the facade look as old as the whatever it is they're concealing, whatever. And then, when you go up to it and you were rubbing away there with your fingers and stuff like that on the rock, or so-called rock, it was breaking away. There were clear signs of erosion, all that sort of stuff, bricks not being aligned in the corners and things like that. And well, levels as well, right? I mean, when on approach to the building, again, hopefully we'll see that soon, but on approach to the building, see, it goes well below ground.
Yeah, that was an interesting consideration. That one was weird. How I think it, it struck me then looking at that building was that how when the first people came back and reclaimed that building, they used a lower entrance. And then it'll help when the video comes up on that, and I can talk through that.
Right.
Are we there now?
Yes, this is the college building. This is the front.
Yeah, just to the side of the entrance. Hey, we're on the left.
That's right. We went down that little bank,
there.
didn't we? We climbed over and went down the bank, and then there's the front of it there.
Yeah. So yeah, we're already, what, 10 foot or whatever below street level, maybe not quite 10 foot. And yeah, that was a pretty big window. I think that one looked like it had been retro. A hole had been made for that window to go in. But
yeah, if you took the window and the frames out of there, that was just an open kind of entryway in between the pillars there that you see.
Yeah. So that's the clock tower up there, and did that have some interesting metalwork inside it? I can't remember. We could see something in there that was fascinating, but I can't obviously hear what we're saying at this time.
No, I think we were talking about the window and that being the gap there, and there's no brickwork in between the two pillars there. So obviously, even for the facading, they've gone through great lengths to make it look like the facading has been retrofitted with newer stuff on top of the facading as well, which it obviously has.
Yeah, there's little doubt in my mind, guys. If you're listening to this, you're thinking, no, this is the original building. I can assure you that we could walk around this building and I'll point out 20 things that we like. This shows the evidence of it not being the original, and that's without even getting inside the building. But it's it becomes more and more obvious as I look at this that there's something amiss with this, because we are talking about a time when people didn't have a lot of infrastructure, and so to use the amount of bricks that we see just on the facade plus the bricks that we believe are the original structure beneath that is, well, overkill, really. It's just so much work, and
it is,
it just doesn't seem necessary. The thing is that we're so used to seeing these things with such thick walls that we just simply accept them as, well, that's how they built them. But as I said, with Letton Hall, they were hiding. When we did a bit of back research on the Gurdon family, the original owners of Letton Hall, and how the original Letton Hall apparently just goes away, or there's no one knows exactly how it burnt down or disappeared, but the original Letton Hall goes back, and goes back to the 1600s, this Letton Hall. But the new one is only built in the, no, it may have been refurbished in the 1600s. I'm going to have to go back and look at my work on that. But
this bit here outside the college, Dave, this is the bit where outside of the facade is a part of it that looked older than the facade that was put closer to the original building.
Yeah, that's funny, isn't it?
That's very strange. It's like they put the facading in between a part of the original bit and whatever. I don't know, but it was very, very strange.
Yeah, and I was suggesting that this section that you're looking at now is actually an add-on by the people that came in the later period, so towards the end of the 1800s, and they added this on as a way of getting into the building. So I think I'm pointing out here that these are not built by the same people. They're not tied together. I thought something was missing there, but it isn't.
Yeah, it was. It turned out to be the red and white brick and rock.
Yeah. But those two sections are not built at the same time. I was suggesting that this section, looking as old as the bricks as old as it did, could have come from reclaimed bricks, because as part of the refurb that we know, they might have cut out some of those window spaces that we were looking at a little while ago, and used the brickwork from that to create something like this. This is the bridge to get from the new street level into the upper street level.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's into the new first floor, or ground floor rather, which would have been first or second floor from the original.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
it opens this idea, just like they say in Canterbury, we got two below the current street level. There's two more levels, and so it could be that there was originally, if we go around the front of this building, I think we do. But originally there was an entranceway that would have been used by whoever used this building after the original mud flood, because it seems like it's all part of that same period. We seem to have frozen up here with me peering into the window.
Yes.
But I even suggested that this window could have come from an original part of the building, but have been just put here. And it's only looking into this dark and dingy downstairs towards what would have been a more impressive door at some point, but is now, only suitable for people willing to duck on their way into the building.
Yes, absolutely. Don't know if we can get that going a little bit. Probably, maybe not. But anyway, yeah. If you went round that sort of wall where you can see Dave stood there, so if you went round it, hugged it, and went round the front of it, and looked in and turned left, so you from the inside left, you'd see that entry that Dave's looking through there. But then, of course, the front part goes down, and I know from inside the college, they definitely have basements in there, deep basements. There you go. There's the front of it there. So there's your.
Okay, I think we've actually walked straight upstairs to get above. We're now above where I was looking in, well above that.
Right.
Oh, I think. Yeah. So we've actually gone up here.
Right.
On the floor there, it says 1881, I think, if my memory serves me.
Yes.
And then this is the current door. This actually isn't that impressive. There were two students having their lunch there.
Right.
And they were filling the doorway basically to this amazing building. That was all that there was in the way of doorway. I'm rubbing the building apart. If you go back there every weekend for the next year, you'll probably be able to rub the whole building off. But
this time next year, the college will be a computer room down.
Well,
yeah.
Well, I mean, back to the original building beneath it, perhaps.
Right.
And
this is the thing that, because that I've noticed, and unless you've been to Bournemouth, you won't know. But the ground is not. It's not Holland, right?
There you go. There's the entranceway, by the way. Sorry to interrupt you.
That's right. No, please do.
Down there, that's where you would have gone in. We couldn't get down there. I think it was barred off now. So
that's right. It was gated up. It was gated closed. Yeah.
Yeah. We didn't really look at that hard enough, but yeah, that's again, I don't know what the original purpose of this building was, why it was needed to be covered, but no doubt it has been mud flooded. And the usual tricks of the trade have been pulled to try and make this inhabitable, usable again. So this whole stairway either side of this dark, dingy entranceway to the original, what I believe might have been the original door or a secondary original door. That's all. That's all been added on, made to look original, like it's the same thing, and perhaps it's the same people that clad this building. But yeah, that wasn't the original building for sure.
And here was this was a bit that highlighted it, Dave, was the erosion on these stone banisters, as it were.
Oh yeah, they were very pitted.
Right.
Very, very, very worn away, and that's not stone wear and tear. I've been in the mountains of Portugal and looked at stones there and how they've weathered, and that's not what you see. That's the breaking down of bonds in the so it's man-made cementing process, molding. So this is all molded. What's that?
Oh, some
don't say that.
hoodlums graffitiing the floor again in Bournemouth. I know.
Earth is flat. Oh, is that
Always
because the
when we're
water
out
is level?
filming.
Because I suppose it's because water is level, and that's
Maybe.
why if Earth is
Yeah, but it's
70%
not though, is
water.
it? Because yeah, but raindrops aren't level, Dave. Come on.
Well, yeah, but we can't live on a raindrop, can we? I mean, so I mean,
Well,
I've tried.
if we consider us to be a speck of dust in outer space, then we would appear to be a raindrop in the bigger
Just,
picture, wouldn't we?
just flying rapidly through space and holding an oblate raindrop kind of shape.
Aimlessly,
It's a
aimlessly.
wobbly existence, I would have thought. But
Yeah.
that's these buildings have managed to survive all of that wobbling. So clearly, you can live on a teardrop, or a
You
dewdrop on
can.
a piece of glass on a grass.
You can. I was just about to break up into out into a Womack song or something like that. Didn't you sing Teardrops or something like that? I think so. I can't remember.
Yeah,
Anyway, I don't
yeah.
know. I don't know.
It
But it's
might, is that me
fascinating.
down?
It's fascinating
That,
stuff because, of course, all that lawn that you see there, that grass and all that thing, right? Now
mm,
that goes well
mm,
down low, right?
below my feet there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's big retaining walls to the left of the image. That's big
Yeah.
retaining walls there. It's a lot of engineering to want to put to just to go to the trouble of creating a below
Yeah.
floor building.
Yeah.
It doesn't
I mean,
accord with what would be
look at that
common sense.
tower. Look at that tower. And the tower is reminiscent of so many that you see around the world, dotted around the world, the kind of style, the colors, the brickwork, the general architecture. It's very, very similar to, I came across a video somebody put out. Have you ever heard of a place called Crouch End?
Yeah,
In London?
yeah.
Well, it's basically Highgate Station, right? And when you look at some of London, as you said to me, is full of this sort of stuff, right? It's just everywhere. And of course, I've noticed that when I've been to London here or there, and and now that I'm looking at them properly, I'd probably see much more when I go there next. But it was interesting because when he showed the background, they had a tower almost just like that, bit smaller, but the same kind of format.
Okay,
The same kind of structure.
Okay, so what I'm going to suggest to anyone listening is that how our plugs have got these three prongs generally, and they go into the wall. Well, imagine if the tower is the prong into the ether, and the building is the sort of plug or the battery that sits beneath the prong. That's what I'm one of my speculations on that is that it was a plug into the electric system in the ether above. And the more we've looked at on this last 6 hours together, the more we've looked at these church spires, the more I've become attracted to this idea that the cladding was necessary because they had to cover the device that sits on the roof. And that the device that sits on the roof wasn't what we see now. So, I know what we call antiquitech and so on, what sits on these roofs and so on might well have been used in a similar way. They might have found a way to use that technology, but do it with this cladded antiquitech. But I'm starting to suspect that actually all of that is facade, and actually the real devices are buried beneath the concrete pour that they put on these. And if anyone's interested in that concept, we were talking about it when we were looking at these supporting arms that we typically find on these cathedral spires, and whether they were sort of to help with the additional load bearing that they were now adding to the spire, because originally the spire would have been maybe a metal lattice, perhaps some kind of electrical receiving lattice. That's just a food for thought for people to cogitate on. That's part of the reason why these things have been covered, is that there are devices underneath them, like plugs, that they are.
Well, things have been removed as well, right? So, for example, I would contest with anybody that, for example, and Ellie may agree with this, the water towers. When you take a step back now and you look at them from a distance, they look like they're a plinth with something missing off the top, right? And also, when you look at some churches, the spires are typically missing on the main church part, even though you have the little spires on the rest of the church, like we saw as well on this day where we were right at the end, right, when we visited that church, or walked past it and ended up stopping there to have a closer look. You know, you see a lot of that where they've either taken or removed, it appears to me, that's me speculating here, but I mean, you're not going to get any photo footage of anything or any, how can I say it, photographic evidence of it. And because, like you were alluding to earlier, Dave, you know, if you could take a photograph of, I don't know, a building site, and it could be for one person, something being demolished, and for another person, it could be something being built.
Yeah.
Right. We just don't know which way around the photos are to be interpreted. You know, scaffolding on the side of a building or a tower doesn't mean construction at all. You know, and all these sorts of things that people have to pay attention to, right?
Yeah, and in the case of the cladding kind of argument, then, you know, you could have images of people using, you know, working, but you know, apparently putting bricks up or finishing a roof off and so on, but it doesn't necessarily, you know, mean that they were building the original structure beneath that.
Right, right. That doesn't necessarily mean that at all. It just goes in the history books, and that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, and you know, maybe the cladding's necessary because the mud flood was too evident on the structure, and the amount of new windows that they were needing to cut or doorways they were needing to cut would you know, it would necessitate such remedial works to the exterior of the original building. It would be impossible to cover it up. It would be impossible to create that new doorway through a window without it looking like an obvious change. You know, they wouldn't be able to match the brick or this construction style or whatever. And we see that sometimes where we can see, oh yeah, you can see they've added in the brickwork for the window there, or they've closed that. So sometimes it's obvious, but perhaps they you know, they realize that the only way to really reclaim these buildings would be to clad them, and then they'd be able to get away with it if you did the whole job rather than just patchwork here and there.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah. Go on, mate. Sorry.
I'm not. I mean, I'm not in love with that theory. I just, you know, I have to think about the various possibilities when it comes to how and why.
Absolutely, and I think you've got to go where the evidence takes you, Dave. Do you know what I mean? And it's like what we spoke about last time. We can hope for an outcome or an answer, but that's not the way to take a look at things. You take a look at things and view what you see and draw your conclusions appropriately or accordingly, I suppose. But yeah, with an open mind, most definitely. You know, I can't say I was disappointed when you were talking about the cladding and the facading. It just makes you then think of it a different way. You kind of look at it then differently and go, okay, well, if that's not it, then it's got to be that. But whatever's happened, someone's built them.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can never get away from that foundational thing, is that these were apparently built, all of them, in the 1880s, 1890s period. Near enough, a massive amount of construction, massive amount of digging into the earth. No evidence of where that earth was moved to, how it was moved, how all the construction was undertaken, all the logistics of that, the resources, the manpower, the funding. You know, none of that is clear. You know, it's always, oh well, it was some wealthy banker or some wealthy fishmonger or something. He built these almshouses and donated them to the city or to the
yeah, that's a classic one here. Mary Shelley is always the one. Mary Shelley this, Mary Shelley that. She wrote her book, and now the whole city lives off her money.
Well, like Elon Musk, you know, the whole of Earth, humanity is going to Mars because he sold a website.
Allegedly,
you know,
so, yeah.
Can you imagine being Richard Branson going, "Wow, I've been a millionaire for years and years, and I can only get 50 miles into the sky. How's this guy getting like all the way to Mars already? You know, what's that all about?"
What was the name of the book that Elon's name comes over in? Well, before he was born, by the way. I forgot the name. Something about rocket.
It was written by Werner von Braun. Actually, I think in the 19.
Was it called Rocket to Mars or something like that?
Something like that, and the people who go are called the Elons.
That's right. And the guy, the first president of the land or whatever it is, his name is Elon.
Yeah, he saved humanity. The amount of stuff that goes from science fiction to science fact in the course of one lifetime is breathtaking. Incredible. So, you know, what existed, what technology might have existed before in order to construct or conduct such a construction operation across the plains. Well, I've got some interesting theories starting to bubble up over the last few days about that, but I won't go into them just yet.
Well, if ever you're ready to go into them, you go into them whenever you want to, mate. But absolutely, they're your flying monkeys that we're talking about. You know, flying monkeys in terms of the facading and the cladding, but also flying monkeys in terms of the people who are enabling these storylines to be pushed, these narratives to be upheld and maintained by a system that, of course, promises them a monthly wage, and so they go along with it, right? So flying bloody monkeys everywhere you look, but you can expose them nicely, and that's what we've been doing here. But yeah, you see on that picture there, I mean, that looks like quite an impressive building from a distance, you know, and you can see that from throughout Bournemouth.
Is this, yeah, this is still the same one?
That's still the same one from across the road now, yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't looking at the screen for a while, but you know, that one had that incredible colonnade, or when I say incredible, it was quite a large first floor or current ground floor around the back of that building on the side there. It was also the flat roof. There were things that didn't really make sense architecturally, and it all appeared to be like a massive add-on, and all of it in that same, all of it with the same facadery. So yeah, I just encourage people to go out and really try and look at some of these buildings for yourself. Sven and I really got a couple of great opportunities using a bank holiday, a Sunday, I think, equivalent. Right. And the other time it was a weekday, but we did all right. We did get asked once or twice, what we were doing around the back of a building, but in the main, you can get around the back of these places, have a little squiz around, and go, hey man, that really doesn't add up to what we've been told.
No, and in fact, some of their reactions are actually pretty good. I remember the lady stood at the bottom of the road. She was obviously having a vape break. I think that's a thing now. And remember the blonde-haired lady who seemed to work there nearby. And when you asked her about the buildings or whatever, she said, "Oh, I never really noticed or never really paid much attention." And that is, of course, a classic response, because you're not talking about something that could polarize necessarily. You're talking about something that you can literally see right in front of you and go, "Well, that's actually interesting. Why are cellar windows popping up above the ground?" And normally they'll come back with the answer, "Well, they just build on top, build on top." Yeah, okay, that's fair enough. You can build on top, but it still doesn't explain why you would, why you would then find these things popping up all over the place, and yet there's no mention of the ground appearing that height in any of the history books.
Yeah,
yeah.
I think we walked around the back of like a terrace of houses, and we were looking down into some of the house. Where was this one? Happened to be a warehouse of some sort, and the warehouse ceiling was, a good 40% taller than the ceiling of the the houses, the properties that were above it. And again, there's like, so this is down below the ground, and you've made a ceiling way higher than you would need it for a cellar or a storage or whatever. You would want that to be perhaps a ceiling for a ballroom or something impressive, but not for a underground storage that you've got to dig every inch of the way into the hard soil. So
I mean, this is an example here on the picture right now, right? You see a lot of these buildings, excuse my finger on the lens there, that'll go in a minute, but you see a lot of these in Bournemouth where they've either dug that out to be able to, or they've dug into the ground once they've built the buildings, but you wouldn't dig into a ground to build cellar windows and to build windows below ground level. You just wouldn't do that. So, you know what I mean?
No. Yeah, and that's very deep. I mean, that's a good 3 meters deep, that one, I think.
And these buildings are kind of everywhere.
And then we remember that, those windows are, when you see those windows, they're not the floor height of the building inside. The building inside is still another 3 or 4 foot to the floor from that window frame, from the bottom of that window ledge. So the ground outside is higher than the ground for the people inside that place. Again, this is just, you know, it makes much more sense to have come after the fact and, yeah, let's dig around the front of this, and then we'll put a little gangplank there to get ourselves up to our new front, you know, front door, which will be, you know, a few steps up, cut into perhaps what would have been an upstairs window, to create that.
You would have had to have built. You would have had to have built the pathways that you're standing on there on that screen, so that the pathways, the roads would have all have to have been raised to that level to be able to then build those planks to those buildings.
Yeah,
right, because you know those roads are tarmacked, right?
Yeah, and so typically what you find in the very high end areas like Mayfair and Chelsea in London and so on, they've spent a little bit more money digging out the frontage, and then you'll see it in Bournemouth where some of the top end places have got a bit more space dug out, but oftentimes where it's not that high end, they've just dug out a little bit of about half the window, and that's all you've got exposed, a little box to cut out half the window. Where we're standing now is hollow, down into the recess beneath this building.
Yeah. And then to the right there, look at that window there. You can see the base of the window hitting the ground floor on there, and that's been concreted up to a level, so that goes even further deeper down.
Yeah,
much deeper down.
Yeah,
it's a lot of work.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. You know, and again, that can only be excused away. Otherwise, there's something has occurred that buried these buildings.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I think probably something has occurred that's buried the buildings, and of course, because they were aware of the plans of the buildings, they knew where to go to maybe create what you're seeing there.
Yeah, I mean, that may be the case. And then it may be that they had the plans, but it does require for them. I suppose that's why they keep a central planning office. You know, if that's kind of was to happen again, they might be able to pull those out and just do it like that. You know, I think we also went into a construction site, hey, where it was 2 stories down. We walked inside and it was 2 stories down.
That's right.
But you know, with Letton Hall, the people who are not in the know, they just, you know, repeat what they've been told. They you know, they said, no, well, this guy was a little bit confused. You know, he didn't build that smart, and he made this here and this problem there and so on. And you know, when you go in Letton Hall, it's kind of weird arrangement of the floors and the inside stairwell that doesn't make any sense. And so, you know, I'm not convinced they had the original plans, but I wouldn't, you know, argue it either way. I just, you know, I don't know that that's necessary. I mean, I think that if I came across a partially mud flooded building and I was trying to reclaim it, I would, you know, I would work with what I had.
Yeah, I could imagine that as well, actually.
Oh, I think you know, I think I often feel like the original roof is no longer in play. It is no longer there. And it may also explain why they have to clad these buildings in order to kind of create a platform for this new roof that they might have to lay, which may have been timber. It may have been heavier than whatever was there before. Or, you know, they may not have been able to key it in or tie it in unless they added something else. So that's just speculation. But you know, because there's so much assumption when we just, you know, if they've hidden the original building, it may not be the original. I don't think it's the original roof. As I found with Letton Hall, the roof was only 100 years old, according to the engineers. Then they were, by the way, these engineers that came to inspect it were fundis of this Soames, the guy, Sir, who was the guy who designed this, is credited with designing the building and then goes on to design the Bank of England. This same guy, you know, there's a whole bunch of specialists who kind of follow his work, and they came and did it while we were there, an inspection of that roof, and they said, no, this timber's only about 100 odd years old, so it's not the original roof by any means. And I think that style of roof that I've seen, those tilings and so on, that's typical of the tiling of that late 1800s period anyway. So it kind of suggests to me that this one theory I hold, which is that the roofs somehow gave way. They couldn't support whatever happened, and the roofs were lost as well, and they had to put on sometimes these flat roofs, sometimes these sort of penthouse boxes that they have on the top, and a very sort of insignificant kind of pitch roof
So,
above that.
may I risk a tangent there in the form of a sort of a question, and that is then, are we suggesting then perhaps that whatever happened came from above?
Yeah, I mean that's what I threw that theory out into the Tartaria mud flood community some years ago, but I never really got much. I don't, no, I don't know. I don't know because I don't follow very closely the the cut and thrust of their research. But I haven't heard other people suggest that that it was a snow. But that for me, with the quantum physics stuff, is altogether possible that the ether that we live in has the potentiality to create almost like the source code. It has the source code for everything on Earth. So any tree, any material, any person, any living thing can form in that ether. And so in the same way that water can be squeezed out of the ether, I was hypothesizing that sand could also form in the ether, that with the right frequency, the ether could actually be turned into a sandstorm or sand fall. And the reason I kind of started thinking like that is because it does sometimes seem like snowdrifts when you look at the way that the mud or the sand or the silt is built up against a building. It's like it has that snowdrift effect. You often don't see like all of it having gone downhill. If you took a let's say a miniature version of your city and submerged it in a bath of sand and salt water kind of thing, you try to wash a tsunami of water over it, then the sand would naturally sort of gather in the crevices and cracks and so on, but it would most of it get washed off the highest parts and then gather in the lowest parts. That's what you would expect to see. Whereas with this, you don't get that same kind of movement where the bottom of the town, the lower part of the town, is fundamentally different to the upper part. It's almost like there's 10 foot lost down at the bottom of the hill and 8 foot or 6 foot lost at the top of the hill, which would be more in line with how snow would fall rather than how perhaps a mud flood or a flood of water, which would tend to deposit most of the heavy stuff at the bottom. So that just grist for the mill, and this idea that often roofs, it was kind of came to me doing walking around London a few years ago, that so many original roofs don't seem to be here. There's so much of that boxed off penthouse type action that they put on top, which I suspect is part of the façadery. So from above,
I mean, it's handy to have a few fires here or there to then replace them, isn't it?
few fires.
Yeah, fires. I mean, a lot of these places, when you look back in the past narratives, a lot of the times roofs and stuff like that were burnt down and they had to rebuild them and blah, 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 replace them with different materials and this, that, and the other, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's got to be another option, gutted from the inside out, for sure. I've been toying with this. Okay, so this idea that I wasn't wanting to offload on you necessarily, but this idea that it's a bit of a long stretch here, but I'm going to say it anyway, that we have to consider the possibility that the world we live in is fluid, and by that I mean that the the life-giving properties that come from the sun and the moon, that their presence in our environment may move cyclically in a way that we've not really ever accounted for in any of the research that we've done. And in this case, I would ask you to imagine that, just say I was to be pointing a torch down on the map of the Earth, as we have a flat map. Just put a flat map on a table, point a torch down on it, and say that area that the torch is covering is kind of covering all of the known land masses of the Earth. But what if there is this, they call the precession of the equinoxes. There is this cyclical 24,000 year, 20-odd thousand year cycle of this precession of the equinoxes, and it hints at this idea that the torchlight could move gradually over time from the full coverage of the map in the way we see it, off the map and onto the table. That section of the table of the map may have other land on it, but as it moves over that area and away from, slowly, and I'm talking over thousands of years, but over that, as it moves away, it leaves in its wake a shadow and a dark area at the back of the map, which becomes forever and permanently dark for hundreds or thousands of years, and no one can live there. All life dies off, and then eventually, in a period of time, let's say 5,000 years, 3,000, 2,000 years, doesn't matter, that light eventually approaches that land again, and that land then thaws out, and the buildings that were there, the brickwork has survived, but the wood perhaps didn't, and the roofs didn't, and trees didn't, and so what happens then is the controllers of the world, the people that are pulling off this clever trick, they move on to that new land. They begin the process over 50 years, 100 years, or whatever, of as the land is warming up, of reclaiming the cities and so on, preparing them for the movement of people into those lands. And I'll give you an example of that. Newfoundland in Canada would be like a good example of, wow, we've just found some new land that's become exposed after a long period of what in mainstream science they call, the ice age. It's thawing out again, and they're able to go back over the land. And surprise, surprise, not only did they find a few Indians who've somehow managed to eke out a survival there, or they've moved into the land over the last 20, 50, 100 years as it started to thaw out. They got there ahead of the Europeans, but all of them, they discovered these incredible buildings and cities that are now being exposed, having been under the frost for a few thousand years. Because if some of these grand buildings are frozen and kept in a stasis where there's no weather, there's no wind, there's no erosion of any sort, it's kept in a sort of a deep freeze, I have to accept with this theory that things will crack under extreme cold. So it's not a watertight theory, but it's just an idea of how it might be that the land for some period of time, let's just call it, say, the South America, even maybe Africa, that land was not available for a long period of time. And then once it became available in the, say, 1600s, then the Europeans started flooding back in there, trying to gather up whatever crumbs they could. But yeah, it's just that. So that's just a theory about how the buildings might have actually withstood a long period of time without anyone living in them, and then repaired.
Yeah, well, I find that very interesting, because I agree with both parts of that, but I'd never brought them together. So I do think that I know what you're talking about. I think that what they call the Ice Age and all that in the history books, just like they talk about dinosaurs, just like they talk about a great flood or something in the Bible or whatever it is, they always seem to point to something that might have a smidgen of truth to it that has happened. Of course, a different version or whatever. But I think that it's definitely feasible that what you're saying about the buildings, that the more wear and teary parts of the buildings will erode away and the other stuff will stay.
Yeah.
That kind of makes
Yeah, and I
sense,
mean,
right?
yeah, I mean that theory could be, it could be simply that the whole place is flooded for, in the same way it's flooded for X period of time. However, the flooding thing for X period of time would mean you'd expect to see more evidence of um, beach sand, sea life, and so on. I know there are examples of sea life being found on mountains and so on, and so some of this could be explained in that way. But I think that if this had all sat in a pool for maybe 100 years or 200 years, it may not have weathered that well. And again, it might explain why they had to clad everything. But
Well,
I like this idea of everything having been well, it's an idea that everything was frozen, in some kind of freeze. And when they talk about those future movies like 2012 and things like that, well, they could be talking about what happened, a few hundred years ago, and or 1,000 years ago, and then after that cataclysm, then there's a period of reconstruction, rebuilding by certain um, bodies, and then a recolonization of the land. And my idea, because I think in terms of electromagnetic toruses, and they are spindles. They do, if you spin up a spinning top, it doesn't sit necessarily on on the exact same spot. It will kind of make a turn around its, like this axis they talk about the globe,
sure.
being off at 23 degrees or whatever. So,
Yeah.
but it'll spin like that, like a top does. And if that's how a 24-year cycle might look like, then that 24,000-year cycle may, over the course of 2,000-3,000 years, move the sun away from the land that we recognize, to other lands. Perhaps more illumination over the Antarctic region, which exposes more cities and continents. Perhaps that for hundreds or thousands of years might have been off unreachable, or uninhabitable because of the changed climate. There's that story of the Thames used to freeze up so much they could run a market on it back in the day, a few hundred years ago. So, does that hint at the sort of climate change that's real for this place? And that is that things do change so dramatically that eventually a segment of the world becomes uninhabitable. Andrea and I were speculating over this a few mornings ago, once all of this juice started flowing and I was saying, well, wow, imagine if you took that same flat map, from east in the China in the east to Hawaii or California over the west side, whatever, and that you had to move that lamp from, let's just say, go back 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 years. And you had to start moving your lamp. I don't know what's beyond China. If you go further east of China, I'm not making any predictions on where it might come from or what might be before that. But just imagine if I had to take my torchlight now and start it from China 6,000-7,000 years ago and gradually move it over the map, over the course of 3,000-4,000 years, to get to a point where 1,000 years ago, all of Europe was now fully illuminated by the sun, and that the people that are now in, the Chinese, for example, they've now had a few thousand years of civilization, getting on, doing what they do, building the Great Wall, whatever, whoever built the Great Wall, doing what they do, and then it offers the idea that, wow, so as other sort of areas came on stream, it thawed out and exposed, the Acropolis and the Colosseums and all those things that were there from the previous civilization pre-thawing, or pre sort of flooding. And then slowly it makes its way over Europe and then eventually to the Americas. Now, if that theory has any validity, then it means that the moving torch continues to move past Hawaii and whatever's west of Hawaii, whether it's, you favor that it's going around and there's more land to be found beyond that, or that it's just going in a straight line beyond that for some thousands of miles or whatever, but that it goes that way. But as it goes that way, it leaves China in the cold again. And it would shut China down, essentially, and force people further and further west, which is kind of what you see a little bit in the world, with China trying to move into Africa and has been doing for, into, well, all over the place, really.
And just to extenuate your point, so then the same would go for Europe. So as that torch moves away from Europe,
yes,
we would then, for example, over a space of thousands of years, fall into a period of darkness, and
yes,
that torch would move on to either lands we know nothing about because it's outside of our known realm, or at least the one we know about, which is probably different to the official one anyway. But yeah, and so it continues. Yeah,
correct. And so what the world order would be doing would be, systematically, as lands ahead of us, whether it be the Antarctic thing or whether it be west of the Americas, for using my theory, which is obviously very, 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 very thin theory, but to use that theory, then they would be currently, for the last 100 years, perhaps been working on lands that are further west of Hawaii, or perhaps in the Antarctic, so that a time will come when China is no longer, or that a particular part of the world is no longer habitable, and then people are then required to move. I mean, if you think about Australia, there are anomalies in the southern region of the world. It doesn't necessarily fit that same timeline or that same paradigm, but Australia is an interesting one, because that seemed to be, just my sense of it was that a vast land that had a very, very thin population of Aboriginal people. Now, are those people who somehow managed to survive, a community of them that managed to survive hundreds and thousands of years, where that land was uninhabitable in the main and had been sort of walked away from by so-called civilization, and they'd somehow gone underground, somehow managed to survive it, or they were on islands that found their way there at some point. But it does seem to me, this idea that these lands are wiped clean, and then there's a few indigenous or original people that somehow happen to be there or found their way there, and then of course the world order hides itself in the suit of the banker or whatever. But the world order, wherever that might be, and of course in my theory, this theory anyway, it would come from China, being that they would be in that situation the previous oldest group here. And then as we move west, we see what they call the new world, the emerging world, the third world. And although these people haven't had the suit and tie slavery in the third world, they certainly have the old world buildings. And so those buildings were there, even though the people that we found in the 1600s were definitely not the people who were building them.
Right.
So yeah, that's just a theory that has to do with the sort of global warming thing. I think there may well be something to this this story, and that they will, when perhaps there's a time in future when it happens that the weather is such that areas become uninhabitable, they will of course be simply blaming the consumer, who by then will be eating plastic bags and pop balloons.
Yeah,
for dinner.
I was just going to mention, or you can roll out one or two other cataclysmic events which would explain certain things happening, right?
Yeah.
And they're well on the way to establishing that. I mean, we all know about agendas and things going on, and there's this as long as you can keep people believing in outer space and the notion that there could be civilizations living on other specks of dust hurtling through space like we are, not, of course. Then, of course, there's nothing off the table for the powers that shouldn't be to able to pull one of them and keep the people still, none the wiser while something really bad is going down on Earth, and it could happen. I mean, I don't think that your theory is very far removed from what is absolutely possible, because how else can you explain well, going back to what you were saying about Australia, for example, right? Again, the one thing that connects that country with this country or any other country are the astounding buildings that we still see stood around there everywhere, right? So that is one thing that does certainly connect up all of what we would call the countries of today that we know of, right? So yeah, something must have happened. Something has happened. And mud flood might not be the most accurate description or title for that.
Yeah, and so the interesting thing that I guess this line of reasoning or thinking offers is that we tend to think of these buildings on a certain timeline, like because we know that 200 or 300 years ago, things started kicking off again here, and there was this sort of influx of people and so on. So that might be a breakpoint, but this idea that these things have been frozen in time offers the possibility that they are 1,000 years old, that they are so old
Absolutely.
it's just any number, almost any number, obviously, and not in the way of the mainstream science. I'm not going to offer millions of years and billions of years. But I do think that if you could maintain them out of the weather, basically preserve them in some state, then they might well have been here for thousands of years, and we've just come around to it in the last 5,000-6,000 years. And all of the story of the Normans and anything that kind of the Celts and all of that, anything that's like 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years old, really sits inside the post-thawing period for Europe, and perhaps in the case of Africa thawed less recently, and more recently, so that it was only in the last 500 years that it kind of came out of the thaw.
Well, either Africa happened more recently, or Africa, as we know it at least, was subject to a much more violent part of this whatever happened, because there is less of the constructions we're talking about, I do believe, in Africa than, let's say, in places like Asia. But then how on earth would I know that? I couldn't compare the two. I've not been to either. But yeah, I could imagine that Africa appears to me a bit like Australia, as a rather large landmass that is nowhere near overpopulated.
I think it's like 4 times the size of Africa. Is as large as Asia, Europe, North America, Australia, all put together. It is gargantuan. It doesn't appear that on the maps.
No,
but I may have said this on a stream or on the last time, but I think that the west coast of Africa, a lot of that is desert, and there's also the Gobi Desert, of course, in China. So I think that these deserts are a clue to the event that struck those regions, and it could be, it offers this is more beach sand type environment. So perhaps it's a slightly different event that takes out these areas. But just anyway, I don't want to spend too long on this theory, but it is just a nice idea, an interesting idea, that there is a genuine and sort of life-ending event that's occurring constantly, and that the weather changing, say in Siberia or some other places, it wasn't always like that. And
I can roughly visualize how you mean it. So if you imagine a large circle, just for figuratively speaking, a large circle, for those who listen, a large circle with a smaller one in it, and then you just move that smaller circle around the inside edge of that larger circle, and as that smaller circle is moving round, we're talking thousands of years every time, right?
Yeah.
And where it's at the moment is the part that's not, that has thawed and it's being lived on, like where we are right now. And it moves on and moves around that larger circle over a period of 20-odd thousand years, right? So, so what we're theoretically saying is it probably may have done some of these circles or cycles already as well. That's possible.
Yes. And that's maybe why there's a second cladding on these buildings, is because they couldn't from whatever technology was here those thousands of years ago, they couldn't match it. They couldn't replicate it. They couldn't, they couldn't hide it.
Maybe that's
for
also what
covering.
explains some of the difference in the architecture as well, perhaps. Who knows? That they were built in different times. I don't know.
Yeah. In different epochs,
Right, in different
and
epochs,
different
yeah.
of cycles of the wheel.
Yeah, because if if your guys in Australia and my guys in England just happen to be, through sheer happenstance, building exactly the same types of towers and buildings all over the place, right? And then you suddenly go from Gothic and you see in Italy a Renaissance building, you're kind of going, well, okay, did they all talk to each other about that? And go, I tell you what, you build one with a few more gargoyles on, and we'll build one with a few, you know what I mean? It's like, well, they wouldn't have done that. It would have been like what we would call today a trend of some sort, but it would have had a more of a practical use, I guess, back in the day. Whereas today we have media involved. Maybe they did have media back then. Who knows? We don't even know that, do we?
Yeah,
Because
well,
anything is perishable in terms of technology. If you imagine the end of the world today in terms of how we know it, what would be left? What would really be left from our generations? It certainly wouldn't be our technology. That would wither and just disappear in time. You wouldn't find anything online because the digital technology would just be rendered futile and obsolete because we can't use it anymore. So what actually could you find out about our generation and maybe that of my daughter or whatever, or those of my grandparents? Not much. Not much.
No.
So,
but if you saw a glass and steel structure in London,
right,
and you saw the same one mirrored in Nairobi, you'd be like, but how they got those two guys must have spoken to each other, because you cannot set two builders, unless they've been to the same schooling or indoctrination system. Then you say to two young lads in two different parts of the world, build me a build me a building for, here's your Lego. Well, they're going to come up with slightly, they're going to come up with different buildings. They're going to, each one's going to have their own style, but they're not going to come out exactly the same. That's just not possible.
I mean, they'd at least do different colors. They wouldn't stick to red and white brick, right? For example, or whatever, that's the bit that sort of, well, it's one of many things that kind of gets me thinking, is like, how did they communicate that, unless they didn't have to communicate that because they were all on that page anyway, which would then suggest different epochs, which is why or epochen in German. See, I'm getting that wrong, but that would explain then why you would have different architecture, even though the buildings practically or functionally appear to be doing the same thing. So you'd have Cologne Cathedral, which is doing the same function as, let's say, St. Paul's Cathedral, but of course, if you look at them architecturally, they could be different, or more different.
Well, this is again just another curiosity of this incredible area of research.
And
it's so tangible,
mate.
It's so tangible. That I do this in the hope that it encourages people to go out and look at this stuff for themselves. Don't get lost in the building, but at the same time, it's definitely, an exciting and interesting way of revisiting old buildings that you probably weren't that interested in until you realize that, wow, it's holding our history.
Absolutely. And while you're saying that, a great segue to remind, anybody who watches it at a later date, Ellie has been flashing up the email address. Do get in touch. If there's any way we can get in touch with you or whatever, or we can share footage or anything like that, any visuals, then please let's do that, because it's something, we can connect some real dots with this. And the more people that get on board with it, I think it generate a bit of interest. And like you say, the tangibility of it, it's right there, isn't it?
Yeah, so when you're helping people crack the egg of knowledge, or crack out of the control paradigm, then this subject certainly has a lot to point at physically in your environment. It doesn't work for everybody, but it's great to say, hey, look, there's something amiss here. And it's one of those cards in the playing deck, that you need to have.
Well, which one's that?
Well, like in the flat Earth in the Illuminati card game, the flat Earth was one low value card, and I think that this one is kind of like that, in that it's a card of the game, but it's not the game. It's showing us that what we've been told has been, it's been facaded. It's not real, or rather, it's not it's not true. So what does it mean? What does it mean for you? What does it mean for humankind, that or mankind, that we've had our we know so little about the buildings we live in, work in, the what's going on underneath our feet. It's a big clue in the direction of realizing that this reality has been cut and paste towards some end, and that end has to be towards hiding truth from you. And it's not just to get away with some Freemasonry, but it's to steer the course of our existence here, and if our existence is connected to all that is, to the creation, then it's, for me, it's either it's a test of this creation, or it's an abomination of this creation to have misled the flock in the way that they have. And I mean, it's great that I mentioned that, because of course we know that our churches, or these big, often these churches, we went around the back of one, didn't we?
We did, yeah.
They're all hiding, they're all part. I don't mean the local priest knows that his building belongs to some pre 1500 1600 kind of period, and it's written off as an 1800s building or older. It's not that they're in on it so much as this this system has inculcated an education into people's minds, or an indoctrination into people's minds, that has intentionally stolen our true history and our true origin.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to jump in there just briefly. That's how flying monkeys work, Dave. They're not necessarily in on it. That they're the willing helpers that think they're doing the right thing. School teachers do it all the time. But the bigger picture, they're either unaware of, or they're not bothered, or they don't want to look that way, or they haven't got the time to look that way, or whatever it is. But at the end of the day, the flying monkeys are those willing helpers on the behalf of somebody they know not who they're serving, right? The person behind all of that, who's pulling the strings on those flying monkeys and delegating and all that, you get it in personal and private life as well as on this scale. They're the ones in this situation would be the powers that shouldn't be doing the concealing and doing all that sort of stuff, right? But yeah, absolutely. Sorry to interrupt there, but I just wanted to get that quickly before I forget, because as you know, I have the memory of a goldfish.
Well, I was glad for the interjection. It made me think about the message that I have, or that I am, the journey that these discoveries have brought me on, is one in which I realize that we've been damaged with misinformation and other tricks and so on. We've been damaged to a point that our society really doesn't love each other very much. We are very much at odds with each other, with our countries from another place, people from another country, and another religion, and another this and that. And when we were out on the second trip around Bournemouth, I came across 2 or 3 people who were in like a pretty bad shape, and I know that there's many, many, many more. In fact, a good friend of mine contacted me yesterday to say his wife found him, just as he was trying to kill himself, because the pressure of his life has just gotten too much. And so the trauma that people have been brought through whether the world wars are legitimate or created, staged events, and the traumas of the last few years, and whatever was done to the foundlings, whoever came to this land first, and they were sort of come through some kind of system of control and workhouses or whatever that set this place up. We've all been given a very challenging task to get through the soul test that I think that we're on here, and I think that this system seems to love breaking the soul, and what that means in the afterlife, I can't say, but it just feels to me like the most important thing that we can do is to take care of ourselves first and foremost, and to seek to take care of our neighbor in the way that we that nature would naturally expect. And so for me, this journey the last 6-7 years has been one of that realization that these grand lies, these huge monumental earth-wide deceptions that have been wrought upon us have been for a reason. And so we need to see them. We need to even have a little bit of a laugh at it and go, look at what they've done. What are they trying to do? They think they can deceive us with these little sticking plaster brickworks and ideas of coming from monkeys and living on some kind of space ball, hopping around between galaxies and all this sort of crap. What have they done this for? Well, I'm certainly not going to let them or it be the defeating of me, or let's put it like this. See, when the Catholic Church got all like, okay, forcing everybody down on their knees and saying, you have to become Catholic and stuff like that, and then people understandably, started protesting against that, and they became known as the Protestants or the Protestants. And I don't want to be a Protestant. I think that the system loves to have people, bend their knee as soon as the Lord walks into the room, down on your knee, slave. And then the rest of them, you go, no, fuck you, I'm not going to do that. They become the Protestant. And I think that we need to see we've been lied to, but the clever way is not necessarily. Well, my version of what is the clever way is to state your protest if you need to, and then go, but I'm not going to be your Protestant. I'm not going to be the ant that is offering the counter energy into the system.
Exactly. Because that would make you part of the game.
Yeah, that's the game, is to keep you enthralled by it, So So even if you're a super woke, and you're super, a guy I met in South Africa comes to mind, but he's so super kind of concerned about the coming plasma apocalypse that he cannot enjoy his life. And so if I was the guy running the system, I go, I've still got that guy, he may know a lot about me, but he's thinking about me all day long, and that's exactly how I want it. So so for me, it's like, I offer this because I don't want for people listening to think that this is all she wrote is that you study up on how Tartaria was hidden, and the mud flood got pulled off, and when we are the main story, we are the center of the universe, and it should be okay. So you have been lied to, you have had your ship steered well off course, you just have to grow up and accept that. And what are you going to do to put yourself back on course? And studying up these subject areas will not, although obviously for me it was like I saw these things and I realized how much greater we must be than we've ever been taught, which is why I try and live my life in a way that is honoring of the greatness from which we come, and to which we are headed eventually. But I guess first we have to work through a few thousand years of kinks, or maybe it's not that long.
Maybe it's not that long. Who knows? Plenty of food for thought. That's for sure. Absolutely.
Good. Well,
I was asked a few days ago, actually, why is this important with the old buildings and stuff like that? And sometimes it's a bit like trying to answer the question, what's your favorite music? I could never answer that. I never will be able to answer it, because I don't think there is one answer to that. There can't be, because it's all connected, you know, and it's the same with this. I can't really answer why. I don't think looking at the old buildings and establishing that we're being lied to on a grand scale in terms of how they got there, who built them, etc., the timelines and all that. I think that for me, it's the tangibility of it, but it's also the fact that it gives you big clues into, let's say, how seriously the powers that shouldn't be are taking this deception, right? Because for them to go to those lengths is pretty heavy stuff when you really take a step back and think about it. Never mind the education systems and the medical systems and everything else that have been, of course, let's say inherited and bought and are now controlled, and we have no chance in those fields either. You know, it really does blow your mind when you take a step back and think about it. Well, so I understand why people struggle around it. I get it.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's, you know, there's horses for courses, and, you know, and certain areas are going to be far more fascinating to study than others for some people, and that's absolutely right. Some people are far more fascinated by the luminaries than they are by the things on the ground, and that's absolutely excellent. And I'm a friend of Martin Leaker's, and I was always, you know, supporting of what he does, even though I didn't necessarily want to follow it, you know, line for line. Because I think, you know, there needs to be people that are, you know, are experts in that area, and who are, you know, inspiring others to do more stuff and so on. There needs to be that, because this body of knowledge will hopefully spread in time, and you know, there hopefully will be classes, and, you know, we'll go out on field trips around their town and go and look at buildings with a new lens. That would be phenomenal.
Wouldn't that be great? I mean, I was talking to my daughter earlier, and she was saying that she had a choice of French or Spanish to add as an extra language, and she decided to go for French, right? Because the German school wanted her to make that decision. Now, and she was talking about going over to France and looking, of course, because she's aware of the old castles and stuff like that, right? Now, because I'm about, you know, France has a reputation, right? And that we all know of, and, you know, and the chateaus and this, that, and the other. And it would be lovely, wouldn't it? I mean, I had school trips like that when I was at her age, 11, 12 years of age. And obviously I did not at that age look at those buildings even slightly critical. You were just in awe. Wow, look at this. Weren't they amazing back then? You know, that's all you're thinking.
Yeah, none of the big questions about how it's actually done, you know, it's always answered by, well, this, you know, piety. People are very religious, very whatever, very this, you know. So none of the practicalities of actually pulling it off, and none of the, you know, always probably if ever an explanation as to why they went to all that trouble to create all that mess by digging, you know, partially into the ground. You know, and and then obviously to add on that, this idea that things have been clad, which is a bit of a mind blower. It does add a whole lot of extra layer of complexity and you know, stage management into each of these theaters, you know, and then but you know, I truly feel like, you know, it makes us so special here. You know, we have something so fantastical that some entity has gone to vast lengths to hide in a cult. You know, and then the space race is just the latest. Obviously, if you consider that these buildings have been clad, then it's actually a bigger project than the space race and pulling off all Russian space and China, you know, all that. That's much easier to do than to reclad all these buildings, I think. So
you made a great point there, Dave. I just wanted to harp on that a little second, because that is so important. You know, we must be of massive significance to them if they are going to these lengths. We have to realize that, highlight that for ourselves. So for them to go to these lengths, because we know, not that we think, we have an inkling. No. We know about the space thing. We know about these buildings. We know about a lot of other things as well. And it's just that just because it's not being advertised in the BBC and it's not in your textbook at school, doesn't mean to say that that isn't true knowledge that's kicking about, that needs to be exposed, got out there somehow. And that's our biggest challenge.
Yeah, so it means that they're hiding. If they're hiding the buildings, they're hiding, they're hiding it from us. And because if us knew what we were, then we
Right.
would not subject ourselves to enslavement by corporations, entities that have
Correct.
had the control of this place for the longest time. But if you go back to my theory about, wow, imagine if the thawing happens from east to west over thousands of years, then the Chinese have had the longest time, even though we have a story of them being 40 years ago being broke, and now they're the world power. But that they have had a controlling, steering hand, and that the Vatican just is uh, the Vatican's just like a cover for the system that sits before that.
Yeah.
But those are just, again, my friend, those are just theories, and
They are, but they're more realistic than some other theories that we have written in and printed in our textbooks. And this is the thing, isn't it? Because it's not in a textbook, signed off and peer reviewed, people laugh or people point or people ridicule. And that's exactly the thing. It's the general attitude and behaviors of humans, or whatever we like to call humans, that they're the fundamental problems, I think, that we're faced with, as opposed to getting our hands on correct information. I think we've got plenty of that. But yeah. Anything else that you wanted to mention just before we sort of wrap up, Dave? Anything that you wanted to sort of express? Any closing thoughts?
No, I think it was really fun and really good to get out. I would highly recommend people try that themselves. Get out there, have a little look around, and but never forget that if you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and make the change. The man in the mirror is the most important thing here, and we have all of us been traumatized through the lies, the deceptions, the cover-ups, the facadery that has made this world what it is today. So the trauma is real, and the wrong sense of who we are and how we care for one another is real, and stems from the original kind of trauma that was brought upon each of us in this incredible system. But I see it as a test. I see it as a human story test over 20,000 years or 2,000 years or whatever. But it's a journey for the sort of, I think, the evolution of the story here. And maybe it's simply that it has to have a winter and a summer. It has to have a cold and a hot period. It's just the natural way of things.
My friend. There has to be a sun and a moon.
There has to be a sun and a moon and a day and a night, and so and that's all good. I think, well, it is what it is. I see the darkness, but I don't need to be enthralled by it. I don't need to be I don't need to define myself from it. And I've started thinking in terms of the labyrinth, and how when we come into this life, we come in through love. And even if the parents didn't necessarily love each other at the time, the where we come from is love. And the labyrinth has only the same way in as the same way out, doesn't it? So we can find our way all caught up in the labyrinth of life, left and right. This is the brain, all left and right, and so on. And actually, when we come back to the place we started, which was love, we might find our way home. And I don't mean necessarily we have to leave this life, but the true way home, I think, is through love, not through all the conflict, which is part of the lie of all these these mud flooded hidden buildings that we've been looking at. So that would probably be my final thought for the evening.
Beautiful. I couldn't have said it better myself, which is why I didn't say it, but Dave did.
I'll take that as a compliment.
Absolutely. So you should. And Ellie, look at this right at the end of the podcast. How are you doing this evening?
I'm great. Listening to Dave talk, very interesting. My audio's been fixed for a while. I've just not jumped in because I didn't want to butt in,
Sure.
kind of thing. So, and very interesting stuff, and I like his point of view on how to look at things as well, in how we move forward. Even though we know we've been lied to, and there are things that we want to obviously look more into deeper, then it's also as well keeping yourself grounded, as you try and make sense of everything, because otherwise it's just going to drive you crazy, won't it?
It works this way around, Ellie. It's there will never be a mass awakening before you awaken. You see, so I can't expect outside to be fixed while inside I'm still, I've still got, I'm still putting acid down my throat. And so, I because my own activism is like, yeah, let me, tell everybody the earth is flat and all of these things. But I realize that even if I manage to attract somebody out of 10 or, 2 people out of 100's attention, and they start looking at that, it's going to take them an awful long time, first of all, to work out the vastness of the deception, and then to affect the changes on themselves, or realize the implications of how it must have affected themselves, in the life that they live and what they do and so on. Because, people say, how does flat earth, what does it matter in my day-to-day life? Well, wow, you've been put in the slave farm, and it's completely, your generations before you were all enslaved, and they've raised you as slaved children. And been traumatized. How can it not have affected your sense of who you are and so on? And so I know that I can't expect anything more from anyone else than myself. And I realize that if I'm starting to make changes in my own thing because of this, and it's taken me years to realize this, then it's going to take the crowd maybe centuries or and maybe it never happens that we've got in our lifetimes to that point that this knowledge has come out. But maybe they use, because we know that in the late 1900s, early 20th century rather, they were looking into flat earth a lot, and then World War I comes and kills so much of what people were doing to express the truth about what was going on in the world. So is it possible that life, that the sort of meta events that occur across the world kind of crush any growing, rising consciousness?
2019 springs to mind, Dave.
Sorry?
2019 springs to mind. There was a movement really picking up traction, and then suddenly lockdowns kicked in beginning of 2020, if you recall.
Yeah. So that has to be a possibility, guys. But that it shouldn't deter an individual from going, well, I've got my own journey. You see, this is the thing is that the system wants you out there shouting and resisting and being a protestant, and rather than, hey, but what does this mean for me? This means something beautiful, and if you choose to go and live in a forest and do that beautiful thing, then great. If you choose to do that beautiful thing in the life that you live now, then great. It's not one size fits all, but it is about a recalibration of the self under the truth of this gnosis of, wow, we're something divine, we're something extremely important here, and I don't believe that we're meant to be here as servants to the crown and servants to the Vatican and servants to the Chinese or whoever. We're meant to be kings of our own temple, and that should be the most high ambition for the individual, and through that self development, then the emulation into the community that you're part of is probably far more powerful than being the guy on the corner with a big placard saying world's about to end, repent now. So that's my thought. But thanks for that, Ellie. I'm glad you appreciate it. You found that useful.
It's been really good, and thank you for being here. And I'm looking forward to you, obviously, being involved more, which will be good. And I would like to sort out getting over to Bournemouth soon, so I can come and look at some of the buildings.
Cool.
Go from there. Really.
Cool. Well, I can't be sure how long I'm going to be in Bournemouth for, because my housing situation is tenuous. But well, I'll look forward to meeting you at some time, and we'll see what we'll see what comes up.
Yeah, it would be nice to sort something out, but we'll definitely remain in close contact. Anyway, whatever happens, definitely. Something else I was going to say. Oh, right, Ellie, did you want to just call out anybody who's still in the chat, or?
I can do.
I say call out. That sounded a bit bad, didn't it?
Ken was here earlier, but he had to go. I think he's got study to do. 007's popped in.
Nice one.
Hi. And of course, we've also had Algorithm Bossman popped in. Said hello.
I saw that guy Algorithm in your chat earlier the other day or earlier, and I wondered if he'd ever thought about Al Gore when he came out with that name, because I like the idea of Al Gore's rhythm being the algorithm that brought in climate change. He was the guy who brought in climate change with that movie. What was Unpopular Truth or something? I forget now. But Al Gore's rhythm runs the world.
Well, hopefully he'll join us one day, and you can have a chat with him about that as well.
Yeah, I'd love to get him on. Actually, I've had the pleasure of speaking to him on a few occasions, and not only very knowledgeable, but very kind and very easy to talk to, and just generally a very good conversation haver, as it were. Yeah.
Oh, well.
Nice
cool.
Guy. Nice man. So going back to chat, there's Telx.
Telex is there. Yes, hello, Telex.
Yeah, and then the one you don't see has popped in.
Right.
And and Brandon Cook.
Awesome.
So hello to Brandon as well. I don't think I've seen Brandon before. So hello to you. Thank you for joining.
Yeah.
I've had an audio issue. Everything just.
Well, that's okay. We got there in the end, and I'd just like to say a massive, massive thank you to you, Dave, on record. I'll thank you, of course, personally anyway, and I'll get the opportunity hopefully more often than not. But yeah, thank you very much for giving your time, because I know you've got a bit going on yourself and stuff, and it's really appreciated. If it doesn't come across like that from me, then then it doesn't, because I am appreciative.
Good.
And I look forward to us doing it again at some stage. I really, really do. And one or two other things that might be popping up on the apparent horizon. And it ain't 1.22 miles away, as we know.
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting year, I think. I don't know what's coming. Next,
I think it will be an interesting year. I had that feeling when it clicked in. I thought, this could be quite interesting, and it's up to now it has been. So
cool.
Indeed.
Well, thank you guys. It has been fun, and we'll talk again.
We will indeed, my friend. We will indeed. And thank you to everybody who came in and watched as we were live, and those who might watch this at a later date. The email address has been put up a few times, so please get in touch with us if you can, to share your knowledge around this topic and any information you might have or footage or such like. That would be fantastic. Go on, Ellie.
If anyone oldearth.com, just if you want to share images or any information you've got on any buildings near you or of interest to you, or if you actually do want to get involved with us, then just drop us an email, because the more the merrier, I say. And if we can get a group of people, and really build on this and look into things more, it will be, it'll make it more exciting as well.
Yeah, it will. And, one of those people who will be hopefully getting more involved in the future, hopefully we can get them on next Sunday. But we'll talk about that a little bit more close to the date. But until that, won't mention too much on that. But that would be good, because he's done quite a bit of research in this, all around Portland Way and all that sort of area. And Weymouth, of course, which is fascinating. If you've ever been to Weymouth, Dave, that's quite an interesting place. yeah, in terms of architecture and buildings and impossibilities and all that. But yeah, so we, hopefully we can grow a bit of a community. Well, mate.
Yeah, no, sorry, I didn't realize I was on mute. But yeah, Weymouth that's all fascinating down there. There's plenty of evidence down in those parts of it. That's why, all around the country I've traveled, and I'm almost never without a sighting. So it will be good. And I think if you think, just say we've got 5 and 10 years to build up a library of this, and to build up a body of academic study. Imagine some youngsters start taking it at history in university and so on, if they're allowed to. It starts to change the paradigm and what people are willing to consider. So
absolutely.
It's let it happen, and get out there and find mud.
Yeah, find mud and wallow in it. Right. And so on that bathtub note, thank you everybody for supporting us. And yeah, we will do another pod this coming Sunday, as I just mentioned a second ago. Thank you again to Dave Trinity4. Please subscribe to his channel if you haven't already. That would be fantastic. And please also subscribe to the SvenP channel if you haven't already. That would also be rather fantastic. And while we're at it, please also subscribe to the EllieB channel as well. That would also be quite fab. Apart from that, Ellie, any final thoughts before we go? Because otherwise I'll just say ta-ta for now.
I'd just say look out for hopefully a video coming out this week.
Yes.
And next Sunday we'll obviously hopefully we'll have someone joining us as well. Yep. And if anyone, like I say, wants to get in touch, the email is there in the description. And anyone who's watching back in the future, if you do want to get in touch, or if you're of anything of interest, then that's it really. That's all I want to say. I've not really said too much today because I wasn't able to sort my audio but until now.
No problem.
All's good.
All right. Okay, excellent. So there we have it. That is the flying monkeys exposed, really. And the exposure will continue.
I'll leave that up once I'm offline. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, on that evolutionary note, thanks very much for listening in. Speak to you all soon. Stay safe, but in the real sense, not in a nonsense sense. Have a good week, everyone. And and we'll speak to you all next week. Take it easy.
See you now. Bye bye.